All right, welcome to This Week in Mediaocrity, where we present you with all the best in the worst of the media. I'm your host, Joel Foster, and I want to be blamed for the healthcare bill failing, just to be part of the club. This week was normal enough in that we saw our president pick fights with pretty much everyone in what I can only assume was an homage to Patrick Swayze in Roadhouse.
Sorry, we're closed.
Well, then what are all these people doing here?
Drinking and having a good time.
Well, that's why we're here.
You're too stupid to have a good time.
Yeah, attempted murder is the coolest. Trump unsurprisingly called out Democrats for the healthcare bill's failing, but a bit more surprising was he had major beef with fellow Republicans, specifically those in the Conservative Freedom Caucus. Even more specifically, Reps Raul Labrador, Mark Meadows, and Jim Jordan, who Trump tweeted at directly. The reps didn't respond on Twitter, but are writing a diss track that they'll release next week on YouTube and SoundCloud. Cannot wait. But Trump saved his thickest bile of hate for the New York Times, who for Trump is like a combination of Rosie O'Donnell, Chuck Schumer, the Constitution, and chapter books. He's dubbed the Times the failing New York Times, continuing his knack for lazy superlatives. Crooked Hillary, Lion Ted. Say what you want about the guy, but he's unrivaled when it comes to clever nicknames. It began when he posted this tweet, where he gave some advice to the failing New York Times, that he's in saying that they would do much better if they were honest. With a 35% approval rating, maybe the president should use his own advice. Then the next day, the president took us down memory lane and asked us, remember when the failing New York Times apologized to its subscribers right after the election because of their coverage was so wrong? Of course, ending the question with an exclamation point, which docked him 10 points off his final grade. Ah yes, I remember those times. So simple back then, before every environmental protection rule was overturned, before we were blasted with constitutional violations every week, before bad and bougie. That was back when America was still great. We should really get someone to make America great again. But if you do remember, the Times didn't actually apologize, but simply said that they underestimated the amount of support for Trump among American voters. See, like many of us, the Times had more faith in America to think that we'd be duped by a walking, talking pair of Hooters shorts who doesn't appear to understand how his native language works. But it didn't matter, because our ADD-addled circus peanut president moved on to his next gripe the next day. This time, he called out fake news, asking why they aren't covering, quote, Podesta ties to Russia as covered by Fox News or money from Russia to Clinton. Sale of uranium? They might not be covering it because Hillary isn't president. I thought us snowflakes were supposed to get over it and accept that Trump is president. Well, we did. And now the press challenges the president. That's kind of how it works. But for the hell of it, let's investigate what he's talking about. And it just so happens that Breitbart helped us out by posting a bunch of stories about the issue before and after Trump sent the tweet. What a coincidence. The articles were mostly about how Representative Louis Gohmert called for an investigation into the Podesta Russia links. In case you forgot, Louis Gohmert is the guy who says these things.
For our civilized history, a man that didn't know which he was pitied, loved, encouraged, but educated people said, that's perverse. That's basically the most widely used where the word perverse was most widely used.
Yes, and those civilized people also thought of black people as property, and that using leeches would suck out evil spirits. Although to be fair, Louis Gohmert does like to leech himself on the weekends. Oh, but Louis wasn't done breaking it down for us uncivilized folk. Let's hear his idea for next summer's blockbuster sci-fi movie.
I mean, I really wonder how many people in this body who had the ultimate power to decide whether humanity would go forward or not, whether it was an asteroid coming, something that would end humanity on Earth as dinosaurs were ended at one time. Okay, we've got a spaceship that can go, as Matt Damon did in the movie, plant a colony somewhere. We can have humans survive this terrible disaster about to befall. If you could decide what 40 people you put on the spacecraft that would save humanity, how many of those would be same-sex couples?
Well, Louis, if you represent humanity, I would pick all same-sex couples because maybe humanity should end for their own good. So what is Trump talking about? Let's start with Podesta. As you probably know, John Podesta was Hillary's campaign manager, who was then outed by WikiLeaks as being a UFO enthusiast who's friends with Tom DeLonge of Blink-182. But loving pop punk isn't his only bad decision. He's also on the board of Jules Unlimited, a Massachusetts-based solar company. Also on the board is Russian banker Anatoly Chubai, who joined a few months after Podesta. Funny enough, Chubai also sits on the board of TMK, a Russian steel company who will benefit from the Dakota Access Pipeline. So he's everybody's friend. So this is the Podesta connection, that's it. Keep in mind that Jules is an American company. Pretty weak conspiracy, right? But what about the sale of uranium, which Trump mentions like he's making suggestions for next week's executive order? Sale of uranium? What do you think? Well, this goes back to 2011, when Hillary was a fresh-faced Secretary of State. She was one of 9 federal agency heads who approved a Russian purchase of a controlling stake of the company Uranium One, an international mining company headquartered in Canada, but who also operates in the US. But because it operates here, Russia wouldn't be able to export their uranium back to Russia, which the president must have forgot to mention. According to PolitiFact, it's more likely that Russia wanted to buy a piece of the company because of their operations in Kazakhstan, the world's #1 producer of uranium, and Borat jokes. So what's the issue here? Where's the conspiracy? Well, it seems that investors in the Uranium One deal had long-term relationships with Bill Clinton and gave money to the Clinton Foundation. But as PolitiFact points out, most of the donations occurred before Hillary was even Secretary of State. So unless these guys can see the future, which I'm sure Trump will tweet next week, there's not really anything there, much like Trump's chin. And yeah, it does seem a bit sketchy, but Trump should be the last person accusing someone of having conflicts of interest. It's like the pot calling the kettle orange. Okay, so what does this have to do with us? Why are we talking about Hillary? Well, after his Twitter airstrike on the Times, Trump finally delivered the crushing blow with this tweet where he suggested that libel laws should be changed. Here's where it gets scary. If libel laws were changed, this means that news organizations could be sued for writing something that the president considers to be untrue. Of course, the case would be eventually dismissed, but this is part of the Trump strategy. Drag people into court and bleed them dry until they give up. His approach to governing is kind of like farting under the covers and holding your little brother's head under there until he tells you that you're king. Sure, these tweets are silly and they should be ignored, until they're not. Which is kind of like Trump's campaign. We laughed and we ignored it until it became serious, when it was too late. So once again, do your research and please look beyond the tweet. That's all my time today. This has been the Department of Mediaocrity and I'm Joel Foster. I will see you next week. Have a wonderful weekend.